Hi, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. The coffee's kicking in, it sounds like. Good to see you all, and great to be here. I just have loved all of the energy, and you'll have to pardon the pun there, but it really is true. There's a lot of energy in the room around what we're creating together, and what a great county that we're doing it in. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. So thanks again, Deborah, for such a warm introduction. It is fantastic to be here at, I guess, the first reunion of this summit after COVID. And after such a difficult time for all of us, it has been shown our resilience as a group together, that we can come back here and show in so many ways that we're thriving, that we're moving the county forward. And as Deborah mentioned, I've been at ERA now for 16 months. And I have to say, my COVID story is a little bit different than yours. I started the new role, as CEO of the company from my bedroom, which was interesting. At least it was a short commute. Look, the fact that all of us are here and thriving is, it shows that we can come together and we can conquer something that is difficult, uncertain, and do it together. Our adaptability will be critical not only as we make our way through the remainder of COVID, but also as we deal with the many other challenges. And I think we've heard that there are a lot of challenges in the space that we're talking about, and I'm going to further that discussion today with you. I think it's especially important that my introduction came from somebody who's a solar executive, introducing somebody who's the CEO of an oil and gas company. And I think that's fantastic because that is the kind of partnership, the yes and, that we're going to need in this county for years and decades to come. I'm happy to be here to discuss with you a topic that I am especially passionate about. It's about how do we, through all of this discussion, create a viable future, a constructive future for energy in the state of California. I'm a fourth-generation Californian. And I came back here after being gone for roughly 20 years. And I want to see this state continue to thrive. And I'm committed to be a part of that. Today, my remarks are roughly broken into two halves. In the first half, I'd like to explore with you what I call the dual reality that we've got. The dual reality essentially says that this state is going to require liquid hydrocarbons for years and decades to come. And at the same time, because of climate change, it demands that we follow a more clean and responsible way forward than we have so far. This is about progressively moving towards lower carbon intensity processes and products. And in the second half, I'm going to discuss what good looks like from our point of view as we seek to move through these two realities together. Okay, so let's dive in. See if I can pass the first test here. Oh, yes. So I think this slide speaks to the essence of the dual realities that I was discussing. On the left of the chart shows the latest global forecast of liquid hydrocarbon demand. After a bump from COVID, experts forecast consumption to continue to increase globally, due in large part by growth in developing nations and, of course, the growth of the middle class all over the world. This is the reality. We are going to be living with liquid hydrocarbons for decades to come. Standing beside that reality, as illustrated here, is the international scientific consensus, as illustrated by the UN IPCC, which suggests that there are widespread and rapid changes going on to our climate. The surface temperatures have risen by 1 degree Celsius. And I did the calculation here in Bakersfield, and we're seeing roughly the same rise over time here. But it could potentially rise even farther to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, or even further without significant reductions in carbon and greenhouse gas in the coming decades. This will prove a daunting task, and the talks in Scotland show how challenging this is going to be for all of us. Meanwhile, closer at home here in North America, estimates suggest the rise in temperature will bring drought, fire, increases in extreme rain events, and flooding. This past summer, I spent some time in Yosemite here in California, as well as Montana. and I saw with my own eyes how we can see how the forest there is stressed, how the environment is stressed. Perhaps you've seen the same thing or felt the change. So on a personal level, as a father, this is extremely motivating to me to think about what world we're creating and leaving behind for the next generations. And I personally want to be a part of making that change collectively. But it isn't all unwelcome news. It seems that greenhouse gases have peaked in the US in 2007 and have been declining steadily since then, largely due to the displacement of coal with natural gas for electricity. And the focus on electric batteries in the past decades has helped reduce the cost of those batteries by 70%. And in the last 5 years, we've seen solar power, which Deborah just spoke about, become the #1 source, or the cheapest source, for electricity in the world. This is a solid start, but clearly more has to be done. And before moving on, let me say that ERA has no independent climate science specialists. But there is a scientific consensus, and policymakers, especially in California, are focused on this issue. So oil producers like ERA simply can't stand on the sidelines. We need to get into the game and start innovating and collaborating today, right now. And speaking of collaboration, I think this is probably a suitable moment for me to pause and thank the people of Kern County, and especially the supervisors within Kern County, for standing behind the oil and gas industry and supporting all forms of energy in this county. I think the agenda we've seen today and this morning shows how well that's being done here. And indeed, we should be shouting from the rooftops on that. Yes. And Lorelei Oviatt, Director of Kern County Planning and Natural Resources, for all of her work on the oil and gas ordinance, the county EIR, and the supplemental EIR. Hopefully we won't have a supplemental EIR. But thank you for your work, Lorelei. It's been really important. And of course, Richard Chapman, thank you for the invitation and the work you do here with the Kern Economic Development Corporation. So, society's well-being depends on a move towards lower carbon energy. But we simply cannot ignore the needs we have today. They too are inescapable. The global supply-demand system is delicately balanced, as you all know. And changes impact families all over the state. Let's start with an everyday challenge we're all facing. If you look at the price of the gas pump, which you see up here, today the price is $4.62 a gallon. That's up $1.50 a gallon from where we were last year. Now think about those that are the poorest among us. Studies show that they spend 10% of their take-home wages on fuel. So it's hitting them very hard. And US consumers are far from being alone in the energy crunch. Right now in Europe, which relies much more on imported natural gas than the United States does, has seen a 4 times increase in natural gas energy costs since January, sending governments there spinning, trying to figure out how they're going to make everything work as winter comes. The fact is, and the reality is, that we find ourselves in a world where oil and gas is very much at the core of modern life, and we simply can't snap our fingers and change it overnight. It's going to take decades. As I was out this past weekend, I reflected on the struggle that we've had with COVID and how that intersects with the oil and gas business. And Mayor Neuer, you did a great job talking earlier about the impact of oil and gas and what you see in your city. But what I see when I think about the struggle that we've had and how we've gotten through it, how would we have done that without oil and gas? We've got ambulances running around oil and gas right now. We've got medical equipment made with plastics that come from oil and gas. We've got medical professionals who are flying around, going to schools, going to conferences, going to teaching hospitals in planes powered by our products. And as I drive through the county and look at all this agriculture that we've got, most of the fertilizer that powers that agriculture comes from natural gas feedstock. So our world is intimately intertwined with oil and gas today. That's inescapable. Now, as I've already said, the core point here is that people are dependent upon it. And the key that we need to keep in mind is that policymakers simply cannot move ahead of what society can handle. We've seen globally the impacts of moving ahead of where society is. In 2019, the demand for affordable fuel became dire in Paris. When workers in yellow vests in the streets protested fuel prices that were increasing at the time, it resulted in a truly destabilizing situation there. It started out as a grievance over fuel costs, but then devolved into wider anti-government protests, including stagnating wages, living costs, and income inequality. This violence is something we certainly don't want to see here in the US, but don't think it's not possible. I don't mean to suggest that the US is the same as France, but I think we've all felt a difference over the last months and maybe years on the trust for our institutions, the confidence that we have, and heightened tension seem to be a part of our everyday discourse. We need to make this transition in a way that doesn't leave people behind, that doesn't cause even more devastation and division. To avoid such a future scenario, policies and political discourse on oil must evolve. We need to recognize the supporting role that oil will play and consider it as a component of a suite of energy offerings along with biodiesel, biofuel, hydrogen, and the low-carbon electrification of transportation, which we've heard about today. Why? Because even accounting for all of the changes that we see in California right now, including the governor's call to stop the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035, we will need liquid fuels in the state for decades to come. This chart illustrates a commission independent analysis of California hydrocarbon demand out till 2040 in gray, along with the forecasted production of California crude in red. First, a note about how this was created, and then I'd like to visit with you on a couple of key questions behind this chart. This was constructed by looking sector by sector in detail by an outside group, looking at the uses, the technologies that are coming down the pike, regulatory changes, changes in global consumption that might impact it, and they brought it all together to create the view that you've got here. And as I mentioned before, the governor announced a ban on internal combustion engine sales in California for light trucks by 2035. That's included in this demand forecast. This analysis accounts for it and assumes a scenario where zero-emission vehicles penetrate the roadways to the tune of 50% by 2040, up from just 2% today. So look at this with me for a moment. I wonder what key takeaways you have. When I look at the chart, I take away a few things. Firstly, a healthy skepticism of any forecast is natural. I would have thought the Dodgers were going to win the World Series this year, but that didn't happen. Ouch. Yes, indeed. But look at the result of what we've got up here. I think it's fair to say that we could be far off on some of the underlying assumptions, and there will still be a significant volume of liquid hydrocarbons needed in this state through the middle of the century. Oil will be a needed fuel in our lives for years to come. Also, look at the red line of domestic California production and the difference with the total demand there in gray. The vast quantity of liquids in the state is already imported, which creates real concerns for security of supply, which I'll get to in a moment. But think of it this way. You could imagine somehow that our analysis is wildly off, and that we wake up in 2040 and see that those gray bars there are somehow half of what we expected them to be, which would be an amazing turn of events. Still, even in that world, demand would be sufficient to absorb all of the production from industry right here in California and protect the jobs and the people and the workers that we have here today. So let's draw out a few other insights. First, it's important to know that burning of fuel for transportation is estimated to account for 37% of the greenhouse gases in California. So it's not a surprise that some are calling for an end to oil production today. End oil, they say, and you'll make a big dent in greenhouse gas. But I would argue that this is a misguided and dangerous idea. The challenge with this line of thinking is that it's not a supply side issue. It's a demand issue. It's about the customer. Just look at the history on the left. The red line has continued to decline over the years with no impact on demand whatsoever. California production is decoupled from demand in the state. In fact, Governor Newsom said in a quote, "The only way we're going to achieve our carbon goals is by significantly reducing and ending the extraction of oil." Look at this chart. I don't think the data bears that out. In fact, the governor is considering today a linear phase out of oil extraction in the state by 2035, which would mean shutting off oil produced by Californians for Californians. This means a decline of roughly 10% per year, which would be more than twice the rate of decline that we see in fields naturally. A linear phase out of oil production in the state by 2035 is being seriously contemplated right now in Sacramento. Surely California's producers, including ERA, would benefit by leveraging modern technology to reduce the carbon intensity of our products, which I'll discuss more in a moment. But why end California supplies when people still need it? It makes no sense. Given the reality of demand in the state, I think it's simply wrong to target California workers. I spend a lot of time in the field through my work, and I'm always impressed by the professionalism and grit of the people I see working out there. Shouldn't those people, the people working in our industry, be given a chance to compete for the demand in our state? And it will be there for years and decades to come. The alternative is a massive wealth and security transfer to the Middle East and South America, which brings me to the last important insight I'd like to explore with this chart: the balance of domestic California crude versus imports. Now, many of you know, and it's been mentioned today, that California is effectively, from a crude point of view, an energy island. There are no crude pipelines coming in and out of the state. We are essentially on our own. The rest of the U.S. in 2020, which is the beginning of this chart, let me start that again. The rest of the U.S. this year, in 2020, had the first year in my lifetime where the total value of exports from the U.S. was greater than the value of imports. Why? Largely because of oil growth, which decreased imports from 56% 2 decades ago to just 6% last year. The U.S. has gone from 56% to 6% since 2000. That's given us tremendous leverage as a country globally because we rely less on others for our key energy supplies. Now, over that same period, what has California done? Look at the left side of the chart. The exact opposite. They've gone from 50% 2 decades ago to now importing 70% today. A quick story to illustrate the danger of this approach. I recently went to the car dealerships here in Bakersfield to go and buy a new car. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but driving through the lots, it looked like a ghost town. I couldn't believe it. Several dealerships looked like they were closed. In fact, I asked, hey, is that Toyota dealership closed? And the answer was no, they're not closed. They simply have no cars. Now, the reason why they have no cars is because they rely on chips. And those computer chips are locked up in some other country, and the producers simply can't produce what people are demanding. Now, substitute that inconvenience of not being able to replace your car when you want to the potential to having to make a difficult decision, getting gas to go to work or groceries for your family because of rising gas and energy costs due to ceding even more of our production to the Middle Eastern and South American suppliers. Do we really want to live in a state with no oil production of our own? That seems to be where the governor is leading us. It makes me worried and bitterly disappointed to have this happen in a state that we love so much and with such great and vast resources. Look, we can't change the past, but we can change the future. Recall that the governor is considering a linear phase out of oil production in the state by 2035, which would mean shutting off oil at roughly twice the rate of natural declines in the state's fields. This would mean shutting off jobs, shutting off funding for county services, particularly in Kern, ramping up foreign dependence at twice the rate that we would otherwise need to. And in addition, it means more congestion, more exposure in our ports, expansions in San Francisco and LA in terms of their berths, not to mention more tankers sailing up and down our coastlines. We deserve the chance to compete for continued demand and leverage the technology to bring down greenhouse gas emissions. But instead, the governor seems to be going in completely the other direction. It's unrealistic and unreasonable for people to pay higher percentages of their income for energy and for workers who depend on our industry for their jobs today. We can produce the energy that California needs here. Look, this is a good point to recap where we are. We've got an emerging and devastating climate challenge ahead of us. At the same time, we've demonstrated that the state will require liquid hydrocarbons for years to come. And currently, the state is planning to attack supplies even further, even though we've historically seen zero relationship between California supply and overall demand, which is what needs to shift to make a dent in greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. Now, what many people may not know is that the permitting process for oil and gas has all but ground to a halt in California already, which means that we're witnessing a de facto phase out of upstream production. It's quietly happening without any public debate. And this is a big story that, in my view, does not get nearly enough attention. Look at this slide. For example, this chart shows the number of days it takes for various permits in oil and gas production to go through the regulatory review process. The fact is that California has seen permitting slow to a trickle since 2019 when CalGEM was reformed. Without these permits, industry's day-to-day operations are compromised, and we cannot put people back to work to deliver the energy that California needs. And look at a couple of these examples. In 2019, one permit went from 135 days, roughly 4.5 months, to 2 years for review. That's a 350% increase. Another type of permit went from 362 days, roughly a year for review, to over 1,000 days for review. That's 2.5 years. Here's the key point. It isn't about safety of our air and our water. ERA's employees live in the communities where we operate, so we have a vested interest to make sure that everything we're doing with oil and gas is done safely. In fact, I looked at the industry-wide safety statistics in California, and during this same period, we've had roughly the same number of safety events, irregardless. So this isn't about a safer or cleaner operation. This is about lost opportunity. This is about lost opportunity. It's a Byzantine patchwork that's been created. New steps have come in and created a logjam in the regulatory process. And I think even a casual observer would agree that we're seeing a de facto phase out of oil today as a result of this, not in 10 years, not in 15 years. It's happening today. I believe that permitting reform must be on the agenda. Policy, regulators, and industry need to come together to solve this problem and have workable, pragmatic solutions. And ERA is committed to do our part. We believe in good and solid regulatory processes. I say this because I do believe that there are career officials who are doing their job in an incredibly challenging political environment, under pressure from deeply passionate people who are committed to ending oil production now, not go through a thoughtful transition that California needs to address the dual reality that I discussed earlier. And yet, the phase out is happening today with no public debate. And its impact? A phase out of oil harms tax support for our county services, our energy security, and of course, hits unemployment, which impacts those who can least afford it. So one clear impact of all of this is jobs. Quite simply, permits equal jobs. I was struck by a report that said, shockingly, 40% of Californians don't make enough money to make even a basic cost of living. 4 out of 10 of our neighbors can't make enough money for a basic cost of living. Now, the Biden administration understands how intertwined the oil and gas industry is with the economy. They've signaled that they're not going to make a move that jeopardizes jobs and economic stability the country so desperately needs, while at the same time, they've been out there committed to incentivize the marketplace to drive towards less carbon-intensive energy. But the phasing out of oil through slowed permitting is contributing to real impacts today. Take a look at the unemployment rate right now in Kern County, 8.7% versus the state at 6.4% and the US at just 4.6% during the same period. And here's the key point. This isn't just about numbers on a page. These are real people. I was talking to an acquaintance the other day, and this gal was telling me about her husband, who was a mechanic in the oil field and lost his job at the beginning of the pandemic. And she was telling me about how painful that's been, feeling like he's not contributing, feeling like he's got nowhere to go, and ultimately, in her voice, he struggled with depression as a result. His story is repeated across this state, and certainly here within Kern, time and time again. We're lagging behind in large part because our industries and these people are not supported in Sacramento. The permitting system must be fixed so that hardworking people in our industry and in our county can deliver the liquid fuels that California needs and will need for years to come. Okay, so let me take a moment to summarize where we stand before I get into the second half of the remarks. First, we've shown that resiliency, which is something we've all witnessed through COVID, our ability to innovate, these are all impressive attributes that we've demonstrated through the pandemic, and we're going to need to bring that same can-do spirit to the challenges that face us. Number two, right now, scientists are telling us clearly that there is a consensus on climate change, and clearly reporting that the effects are already happening. And number three, we acknowledge a dual reality that oil is needed today and the energy system needs to progressively move towards less carbon-intensive products and processes. Meanwhile, as I've illustrated, in the coming years and decades, this is a yes and conversation. We need to both incentivize clean energy innovation and big investment in energy while we maintain the existing energy system. That's the reality. This means we need to work together to make visible and address the current permitting slowdown so we don't lose secure oil in our state before we develop alternatives. And with all this hanging in the balance, people are tired of division, right? People are tired of division. So the question is, how do we collaborate? How do we collaborate to move on climate with the economy and the system we live in today? And what can we do to move forward constructively? Now, the administration was quoted recently in the Bakersfield Californian as saying it, quotes, wants to continue working with all parties who recognize the urgency of this moment and are committed to doing more, unquote. In response, from ERA's point of view, let me accept that offer and say that there are three parts to doing more together. First, we need to incentivize viable ideas that can make a real difference on the carbon intensity of the liquid fuels that we provide to customers. Second, we need a predictable permitting system and legal rules to support this innovation. These are big multi-year investments, and the current permitting and legal rules need to be improved in order to lay the proper foundation. And then finally, third, we need the infrastructure, we need the funding, and importantly, we need the people to pull all of this off. This is the constructive future we need together. In the second half of my remarks, I'll unpack each one of these steps. The first area that we need to align on is what transformational ideas have the potential to underpin affordable and progressively cleaner liquid hydrocarbons in the state. And certainly, carbon capture, use, and storage, CCUS, is one of those technologies. CCUS is a proven technology and borrows much from the know-how that we already have within our industry and that ERA uses in the field today. With CCUS, CO2 is taken from various sources and then pumped deep underground. And relying on the same physical traps that nature has used to store oil and gas for millions of years. The good news is that this technology uses existing technology in the oil field to inject and transport the CO2. Now, it might not surprise you, given our position and our skills within ERA, that I would highlight CCUS for you, because I do think the oil and gas industry and Kern County can contribute our expertise in this way. It may not surprise you that the same UN scientists that I quoted earlier highlight CCUS at large scale as a critical component to limit climate change effectively. But it might surprise you that despite all of our knowledge, all of our infrastructure, all of our focus on the politics of carbon, that it's Wyoming, Illinois, Texas, and Louisiana who are leading on us. We should be fast-tracking CCUS projects now, today, in California. At ERA, we understand the urgency of climate change, and we want to work with the state to create viable solutions to achieve the state's carbon neutrality goals by 2045. We want to bring those viable ideas to customers, and California is going to need to get serious about CCUS. Listen to this. One study concluded that in order for the state to reach its goals by 2045, we need to sequester 100 million tons a year of CO2 under the ground. 100 million tons a year. Now, by contrast, listen to this, 1.7 million tons of CO2 CCUS projects have been announced. 100 million tons, what we need, 1.7 million tons has been announced. So the opportunity for CCUS is massive here. And to give you a sense of the scale of investment, remember we need 100 million tons. The Northern Lights project, which was just announced in Norway, is expected to capture 1.5 million tons a year for $800 million. Folks, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars of investment that's going to be needed and needs to leverage the know-how from this industry. Because the fact is, most shovel-ready projects in CCUS belong to companies like ERA. So today, ERA is working on CCUS within our business. However, without the framework that we've discussed, it's going to be difficult to make a project that costs hundreds of millions of dollars make sense. To make that a reality, we need the state's collaboration and support. Now, we're familiar with planning and executing major projects, but we're very much on the frontier of how we get one of these CCUS projects done and across the goal line. With the support of regulators, policymakers, and industry, we can make a difference on the carbon intensity of our operations, just as other industries, as we've heard today, are doing so on their operations. We will play our part. And there are several steps that we're advocating for in Sacramento to accelerate the development of this technology. Now, in our opinion, California must take the following steps to harness and take the lead on CCUS in the state. First, we need to start showing clear political support for CCUS. The governor has been largely silent on the value of CCUS within the carbon plans for the state. We need to provide incentive pathways like cap and trade and straightforward approval of projects. We need to extend the low carbon fuel standard called LCFS in the state beyond its sunset date of 2030, and also consider a floor on that price to sustain multi-year decarbonization projects. And the state also can help advocate strengthening the federal 45Q tax credit. Finally, Lorelei, permitting. We need to fast-track UIC permits. We need to fast-track the other permits that are going to be critical for these projects and address the unknowns that we have in front of us to make these investable. Now, ERA recently came together with several of the state's leading businesses, some of whom are in this room, along with labor organizations, to form a coalition working in Sacramento to further these goals, because we do want to see CCUS take its rightful place as a key element of the energy transition solution in California. To create a constructive energy future in California, CCUS must be a part of that solution. Now, here's the kicker. Without stability, confidence, and a viable framework, these multi-$100 million projects are not going to get off the ground. That's our work. That's what we need to do today. But given the importance of carbon, and given the incentives that we already have in the state, we see this as the right next step. So the last piece in the puzzle of doing more together, that constructive energy future in California, relies on this. It's maintaining access to the infrastructure, to the funding, and to the people that are going to make the real change happen. What does that mean? It means stepping away from phase-outs. It means stepping away from politically opportunistic bans or knee-jerk reactions. It means supporting the industry to deliver the energy that California needs so long as it needs it, even as we collectively move through decarbonization goals. This would keep people employed, keep critical know-how from leaving California and going to Texas, and it keeps our infrastructure working, and it supports investment to mothball old facilities, which we know is a big deal in California, and also provide the billions of dollars that's going to be necessary to invest in this clean energy future. So at ERA, we aren't standing still. ERA's absolute carbon emissions have dropped over the past 4 years. We've invested and signed contracts in solar projects behind the fence line for power supplies in our fields. But to make a significant change in our carbon intensity, it's projects like CCUS that are going to be the game changer. These technology solutions are doable, demonstrated, and critical to the state, and we've got to make it happen together. So, ERA has not been shouting from the rooftops. It's too early, and our real progress isn't about plans, it's about action. So you'll hear more from us as our proof points develop, and we will be working with each other, not against each other, so that we can build this constructive energy future together. The well-being of Kern County residents and all Californians hangs in the balance, which is why I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to speak with you today. So, I've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully you have a few insights and ideas as a result. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a few key takeaways. The main purpose of my remarks today was to highlight a vision of a constructive energy future together. And that starts with recognizing the dual reality of how the climate is changing around us and the fact that we're going to need liquid hydrocarbons here in California for years and decades to come. We must recognize the criticality of the moment and the need for action. I agree with the governor there. Action means harnessing good ideas to bring progressively lower carbon products to customers and creating a predictable permitting system and legal rules to underpin that investment. We are not there yet. And supporting oil and gas operations in the state while leveraging the infrastructure, funding, and people to make it happen. This links all the way back to my earlier comments. We've got to start talking about oil and the people that work in oil in a different way to make all of this work. In closing, I started at ERA a year ago, and I am so honored to stand shoulder to shoulder with the 3,000 plus people that are working for ERA today to deliver the energy that California needs. At ERA, our purpose is to power great todays and better tomorrows. And despite everything that's going on, and there is a lot going on right now, I'm fundamentally optimistic about the potential we have laying in front of us. I believe we can make progress together, armed by facts and pragmatism as core to our collaboration. We can build a constructive energy future together, and California is counting on all of us. Thank you. I think we have now a few minutes for Q&A, right?
Yeah, we can find the microphone. We have questions.
Who's going to be first to break the ice? Ah, I see one here. Can we bring him a microphone just so everybody can hear him?
I can speak loud.
Yeah,
if that works.
Okay, I'll try to repeat your question. Go ahead.
I appreciate the one mention for nuclear power, especially in this valley with aging assets when it comes to cogen facilities, decline of steam, and those they're actually looking for all operators. Kind of like we have a Valley Water where we work as a group to dispose of water and manage that. Could it be something like that when it comes to steam and power and we don't even produce the CO2?
Yeah. I haven't heard about this technology, so I can't speak to it specifically. But what I can say is that we've begun a carbon directorate within ERA, and their entire role is to be scanning the horizon for opportunities which can materially decrease our carbon intensity and do so in a way that's valuable and profitable as well. And I think at this point, where we are in history, being serious means looking at all options on the table. Thank you. Yes.
So many of our oil industry clients are quite interested in carbon capture and sequestration. And the big issue that those who talk about is there are no injection wells. There are no EPA Class 6 wells in California. In fact, there's only 2 in the whole country. Where do you see that going? Do you see any movement from EPA?
Well, I don't want to disclose a private conversation I had with somebody, but I do think that there's indications that the Class 6 permits that have been submitted, and to be clear, ERA hasn't submitted ours yet, that there is very constructive discussion about how to accelerate those timelines. And so time will tell. But if you heard about the scale of what we need to achieve in California, we're talking about 100 of these projects. So if we're doing them one-off and one-off, 2-3 years at a time to get permits, that's not going to get us to where we need to go. But I do think that there are people that are committed to looking at this process and seeing how we can streamline it. And so early indications are encouraging, but we're simply going to have to work through a couple of real-world examples before we can get confident. Thanks for the question. Yes, in the back.
How do you see clean hydrogen playing a role in the future with Erik Energy?
How do I see clean hydrogen playing a role in ERA Energy? So right now, our base business is oil and gas production. And so we are looking at how do we optimize within that? How do we provide the energy that the state's going to need? I think hydrogen has a lot of potential, and there's been a lot written out there about its potential for offsetting, especially heavy transport. So that's an area that we're certainly open to. It's not a main focus for us now, but I do think it's an interesting concept that we will see take hold in California in the next years to come. Yes. Yes, so the question was about ideas, and I think you're looking for a contact within our carbon directorate. Absolutely, we can get that to you. Just come to the front of... Okay, so Cindy Pollard says if you shoot an email to our website, Cindy will get it herself and she'll respond to you. But thank you. Maybe time for one more? Yes.
Erik, thank you for the great presentation. Question that we talk about a lot, and I'm just curious from your perspective, how do we get the energy companies in California to come together and work closer together to drive this? Many of us feel that's probably one of the key issues.
Well, I suppose it's a fundamental question of whether this is a competitive play or not. Just like many other plays like this, I think you'll see partnerships form, and those will happen naturally as each operator looks at their capacity, looks at the value proposition. For ERA right now, we believe that we have viable projects that we're looking at hosting ourselves, and we would be looking to expand those projects to take in not just our CO2, but also potentially CO2 of others who either currently exist in the area and want to pipe theirs in, or maybe even other entrants who are looking for a place to sequester hydrocarbon, new industries coming into Kern County. Okay, I think that's probably a good place to stop. Thanks again, everybody, for the invite. Great to be with you.